Let's go over how to complete the blade setup on the T1 Tomahawk. All right, so the blade setup generally happens in two places. One, after I complete a firmware update, or two, if I hold the units button here for 10 seconds and I can enter it manually. And what the blade setup is gonna do is make sure that the analog markings perfectly match what's displayed on the top tape screen over here with it. So to get started, we can see we have blade setup on the e-paper screen over here. The OLED will say, take a look at the e-paper display. So we're gonna start off, click the button up here. First thing you're gonna do is select what model tape measure we have. It'll default to blade B. So the easy way to check that is look at the blade itself, and we'll see right here, blade B has a B around it, blade A will have a -A at the end of it. So very simple way. We'll put the graphic on the screen as well with it, but here we have a blade B, select that. Next step, English or metric. If we had a metric blade or a split blade, doesn't matter what we use for split. For English, we're obviously going to select English. Metric will have centimeters and millimeters on it. So here we're going to go ahead and click next for the English blade. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to pull out the tape to 10 inches slowly and then retract the blade with it. So again, we're going to move it out. It doesn't matter if you go past 10 inches, just as long as you're approximately there. We're going to do this a couple times with it. This is going to allow the encoder to pick up the position and make sure we get an accurate measurement on it. So pull that out a couple times, go in, and we want to retract it fully in. So we're going to very lightly, from say about 2 inches, pull in. We're going to make sure that the tip of the blade is fully pushed in with it, the blade is flush, and then we're going to complete this step. So step two, we're gonna go out exactly to 1 inch with it. If we were in metric, it would say 2 centimeters, but the process is the same. So we're very slowly gonna pull out and then make sure the exact front edge here is aligned with the 1 inch mark on it. So we're not using a laser, we're just gonna line the front edge, make sure it's perfectly centered over here for the 1 inch. Going to the 2 inch mark, same thing, perfectly centered. So just taking a pause here to see where I'm aligning it for 3 inches with it. I'm gonna move it out to 3 inches, and then we're gonna switch the zoom here on the screen to see it a little bit clearer. Get the focus there, there you go. So you see the front edge here, this front reference surface, this plastic piece, we want to be perfectly centered in the middle of the line that we're aligning to with it. So you can see here, I'm at the 3 inch mark. The perspective might be a little bit different, so I'll try shifting this around a little bit, but the 3 inch line is perfectly split by this front edge here with it. We're not using the laser, we're using this front edge to make sure we get the best calibration. Hitting the save button and moving on to do the 4 inch mark. And we want to get there pretty directly. We don't want to jitter back and forth. We want to go pretty close. Okay, if you go a little past it, then come in and hit the 4 inch mark. And then once we do that, we're going to do the 276 inch mark. So this is a point where if you didn't do it correctly, you would get an error. You'd have to repeat the process because generally they're not aligned correctly with it. So we did the 1 inch, the 2 inch, the 3 inch, the 4 inch, and now we're going to go to 276 inches. So we're going to go ahead and extend this out all the way. Doesn't matter how fast this part of the process is, just get it over there. Okay, so now at the end, we're at the 276 inch mark. On the tape measure blade, you can see we're a little bit past it here. So we're gonna lightly come into it. And something to note here is pushing up the blade. So you can see here, it's biased downwards, the blade, just because of how much is sticking out with it. So first, we're gonna wanna make sure it's pushed up. You see I'm pushing up on the blade, so that's parallel with the bottom. And then here, you can see that pushes it in a little bit. So same thing, we're gonna exactly split the mark on here with it and make sure we're nice and centered over it. So you can see here, again, we'll bring it a little bit closer to the camera, same thing as before. You can see here, we're exactly split over it. So the front edge is lined up over the, you can see here, we're lined up over the edge, splitting that, hitting the save button. And you can see on the side screen, if successful, the calibration was successful. Here, there's another potential error. If your tape tip is bent, it'll display that as well with it, which means that your tip might be bent a little bit at the front of the tape measure. But once it's complete, hit the save button, and then it should be ready to go with it. And now the way to see that the blade calibration was successfully completed is that I go to an arbitrary measurement. It doesn't matter. Usually I like to pick somewhere in the high 2 digits for an English blade. Gonna center it exactly over 85, and you can see the top screen displaying 85, and the front edge is exactly centered over the tip here with it. So I'll bring this into focus a little bit more. So you can see here that the blade tip, if I bring it in exactly in to be centered over 85, you can see that the front edge surface here, which is this front edge, is perfectly centered over the line there, and the screen is showing 85 inches, showing that the blade setup was done correctly, and I'm ready to start measuring. So if at any point I want to repeat the blade calibration setup, I can hold down the units button, which is right here where my thumb is, for 10 seconds, and the main menu screen will appear on it. So we're going to go ahead, hold this down here, wait a couple more seconds. Then the main menu, the blade setup is the first option on here. Just hit this top button and we can repeat the process and make sure we do it correctly this time and get everything aligned up. So again, to recap, the blade setup is making sure that the markings on the tape measure are perfectly matching the display on the screen with it. This process only needs to be completed once if you swap a blade or if you do a new firmware update to re-verify everything is aligned up, but once it's set, it's saved to the memory, and because the printed markings are not changing, the calibration is saved and will make sure that your measurements on the screen are always accurate, ready for business, and ready for the job site.